Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A new look, Prime Minister's questions. Just how will Rishi Sunak fare against the new leader of the SNP? That, plus missed housing targets, the potential for terrorism this Christmas, and dodgy PPE contracts. We'll explore it all after the headlines.
Well, a very good morning. It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Health Secretary's insisted the government is open to talks with health unions, but that their pay demands are not reasonable. It's after the GMB, Unison and Unite unions announced coordinated strike action for thousands of ambulance staff on the 21st of December. The GMB union, which represents more than 10,000 ambulance staff, is also planning a further day of action on the 28th. Members say the strike isn't just over their pay, but to save the NHS, as patients' lives are at risk due to staffing. Meanwhile, Steve Barclay's also made clear there's no shortage of antibiotics after a pharmaceutical group warned there were blips in the supply of penicillin used to treat it. The National Pharmacy Association warned there was an issue in the supply chain of liquid penicillin, which is often given to children. At least 9 young children are known to have died from the infection since September. The public are being warned to be extra vigilant at World Cup events and in crowded places throughout the festive period. Counter-terror police say the threat from terrorism remains very real. Authorities say the run-up to Christmas is always higher risk when it comes to security threats, although there's no specific intelligence of a planned attack. People are being advised to warm their homes to at least 18 degrees as a cold snap begins overnight. From this evening, the Met Office has issued a yellow warning across parts of Wales, Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland and England's east coast. Forecasters say Arctic air will move in, with temperatures predicted to drop to lows of minus 10 degrees overnight. The warnings will remain in place until tomorrow afternoon. But on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio, it's GB News. Now back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions today. This will also be the first PMQs that SNP MP Stephen Flynn will be asking questions as the new leader of his group, following, of course, Ian Blackford's resignation last week. And there'll be plenty to talk about too. The Prime Minister is being urged to expedite anti-strike legislation as ambulance workers become the latest group to announce industrial action this month. And backbenchers have forced two big U-turns in the landmark Levelling Up bill. Well, let's talk it all through now with the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror, Ben Glaze. And Ben, firstly, if you were Keir Starmer, what would be the big question you'd ask of the Prime Minister today?
I think we can expect Keir Starmer to raise the PPE contracts that's now, in hindsight, starting to look a bit dodgy, some of them. You know, we've had this sort of slew of allegations for months about the VIP lane for people who could recommend companies to Tory ministers. And we've got to, you know, if we go back to March and April 2020, there was a huge shortage of the personal protective equipment so vital for NHS staff and care home staff, and the government was doing everything it could to source it. Now, when we look at some of those deals, those contracts, and particularly ones relating to Michelle Mone, the Tory peer, some of them are looking a bit dodgy in hindsight.
Of course, we've heard some of these questions be asked at Prime Minister's Questions before under other Prime Ministers. Boris Johnson always had a favourite comeback to this one, which was a letter sent by Rachel Reeves before she was Shadow Chancellor. I think she was Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, and she sent off a list of companies for the government to use in their scramble for PPE. Now, these were companies that had got in contact with her in the same way that there were companies that got in contact with Tory ministers. It does seem that there's a sort of a bit of a shoe on each foot here in terms of the scramble for PPE in that confused time during COVID.
It was quite a febrile atmosphere, just as, you know, the pandemic hit our shores. I think what Labour would point to is the fact that a lot of these deals did link to Tory donors, or, you know, the infamous case of Matt Hancock's pub landlord, his local boozer in his constituency in West Suffolk. So the links to the Conservative Party, I think Labour are very keen to highlight that. And of course, last night in the Commons, we had Labour use this motion to force out of the government documents relating to this company that might be linked to Michelle Mone, this PPE MedPro. So I suspect we can expect to see those documents, although not in the near future.
Yes, it will be very, very interesting to see. Although I think I'm right in remembering that there was an accountancy firm in Birmingham that Rachel Reeves suggested should supply high-quality masks and the rest of it. I think we might, if that question is asked, we might hear some of those funny examples from Rishi Sunak, if, of course, he's been briefed in the same way that Boris Johnson had been. Sometimes he's less quick off his feet, though. Moving on to other issues, though, we've seen two big U-turns this week from the Prime Minister, one on housing targets and general sort of planning, and the other on wind farms. It's almost like these two are pushing in different directions.
It's all relating to planning, and the Tory party is always divided on planning because it's a Conservative party. The idea is to conserve. They don't like change. But then the house building target of 300,000 homes a year, well, where are they going to go? The Conservative party riven with division over this because they do need more voters, and they have a... If you own your home, you're more likely to vote Conservative. Statistics show that. But equally, a lot of people don't want them built in their backyards, and it's certainly across the southern shires of the Conservative Party heartlands. And then, of course, the wind, onshore wind. So during the leadership election that Rishi Sunak didn't win and then became leader anyway, he spoke about maintaining this de facto ban on onshore wind. But now the Conservative Party backbenchers have forced him into a U-turn on that. So wind farms will be built onshore where there's local consent.
And it's interesting because normally you'd expect the sort of stereotypical Tory backbencher to be sort of anti-onshore wind, and yet it's the backbenchers, it's the people like Simon Clarke, Liz Truss and indeed Boris Johnson who forced the Prime Minister to U-turn on this. Are Rishi Sunak's backbenchers more eco-friendly than he is?
It certainly seems that they are pushing him to those sorts of positions. I mean, the invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th really changed everything because we've all seen what's happened to our energy bills since. So people who were opposed to onshore wind now look at it and think, well, it's the cheapest form of electricity Party, and it's our wind. You know, if we put these turbines on the shores of the United Kingdom, then we're not reliant on foreign powers who can push up the price of energy or cut it off altogether if they so desire.
Well, I suppose that only matters when the wind blows. But I suppose if you're a Tory MP, it's quite an attractive thing for all this private investment to come and build these wind turbines. It's not taxpayers' money going into it. Just finally, the new SNP group leader. Are we going to expect a sort of a more upbeat Prime Minister's questions? Of course, Ian Blackford was was famously slow and, dare I say it, boring when it came to his questions.
He was a little bit dull, and you remember, you sit in the press gallery each week for Prime Minister's questions at noon, and every time Blackford got to his feet, there was this audible groan across the Conservative benches, almost like a pantomime in the end. And he'd puff himself up with his waistcoat, and he became a bit of a figure of fun, to be perfectly honest. So Stephen Flynn coming in after winning this Westminster leadership election last night, I think he will have a new approach, and he's 34 years old. He's only been in Parliament for 3 years, elected at the December 2019 general election, so he'll bring a fresh approach. The SNP itself, it's 44 MPs, they're quite divided, remember, because a lot of them are very loyal to Nicola Sturgeon, but a lot of them also think maybe the focus on independence at the moment, when there's a cost of living crisis, maybe it's not what voters want. And seeing how they rally behind their new leader will be interesting at noon, I think.
Also interesting, Aberdeen MP. It was a Tory seat until 2019 from that 17 to 19 period. More marginal for the SNP. Also, crucially, oil and gas. Might we see potentially more support for the oil and gas industry coming from the SNP front bench?
We hear rumours of the fact that Stephen Flynn and Nicola Sturgeon have previously had fallings out about green issues, because, as you say, as a constituency MP for Aberdeen South, that is a town, a city, very reliant on offshore fossil fuels. So, yeah, that's where Aberdeen's money comes from. So I think he is more likely to be a supporter of those forms of energy than perhaps Nicola Sturgeon might like.
Well, it'll be an interesting change of dynamic. Whatever he asks, I suppose, it'll at least be more exciting than Ian Blackford. Well, Ben Glaze, thank you for joining me this morning. Let's now dive in a little bit deeper to this question of housing, because MPs have said that the government is unlikely to meet its house building targets, falling short by 32,000 homes from its original goals for affordable homes this year. A report from the Public Accounts Committee criticised that not enough socially rented homes are being constructed to ease the national housing crisis. The report will add pressure on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, after, of course, he received a backlash for watering down house building targets to avoid a big Tory rebellion. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me now is the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, who commissioned this report into house building targets. Dame Meg Hillier, thank you for joining us this morning. First of all, is this a particular surprise? We've heard about the housing crisis for a long time. We know that these targets are being missed. What's new in this report?
Well, we have been looking at this actually as a committee, and I know our sister committee has as well, and others. We've been looking at it for over 7 years, but we have now bottomed out the figures on the affordable housing programme, as you highlight, and that's set to be at least 32,000 short, with the cost of inflation and construction costs going up even more. But one of our concerns is, in this report particularly highlighted, is that there are, even within that affordable homes programme, there have not been specific targets for different types of tenure, because affordable can be a shared ownership, affordable rent, which is 80% of private rents, or social rented housing. All of those are important, but there aren't targets for delivering on those. So, we could have it all shared ownership, which wouldn't help the many people who really, really need a socially rented home because they couldn't possibly afford any other option.
Who's to blame when it comes to the lack of these affordable homes being constructed? Is it the central government, or ultimately is it down to local governments who haven't been submitting their local plans to the government, who haven't been fulfilling the targets that have been set by central government?
Well, look, it's a bit of plague on all their houses, really. Not in every case. There are obviously some very good local authorities doing some excellent work. But it's true that there are councils that are reluctant to see homes built. We know that. That's partly why there's been a Conservative Party rebellion on this issue. But there is also, we're saying to the government centrally, you need to keep a proper track of the numbers, and you need to have a bit more of an aspiration on socially rented homes, because if you look at, we've also highlighted that you can save money by doing this properly. So, for example, if you can't get a socially rented home now, councils house you in the private rented sector, often on a 5-year tenancy. That's taking something out of the private rented sector for someone who might need it in that sector, and prices, as we know, are going up for private renters. So generation rent is being squeezed, and many of them need to buy their own homes. So in parts of the country, starter homes might be what's needed. What we really need is a mature conversation between local and national government, but what we see is sort of this screaming warfare, which isn't delivering homes for the people who desperately need them.
Ultimately, the need for affordable homes, the need for socially rented homes and the rest of it is a function of how disjointed our housing market as a whole is. If we had more house building in the private sector, we would probably have less need for that socially rented sector as it stands. Is there a risk that we're focusing too much here on the affordable homes side of things, when actually the problem is a bit larger and more homes would be more affordable if we simply built more?
Well, no. Well, the government has set a target for affordable homes, so it was that we were measuring them on their own ambitions, and we don't, as a committee, take a policy position on this. But what is clear is that in some areas, you can build as many homes as you want, but you wouldn't be able to afford it. So, OK, I'm in inner London, which is a particularly extreme example, but it's £750,000 now for a new build 2-bedroom flat. Now, you tell me who could afford that starting out as a starter home. It's not a starter home. So people on quite good jobs just cannot afford to rent privately or buy their own home. Even if you supplied a lot more, some overheated areas of the country, we're not going to see such a radical reduction in prices that it would be possible. So we still need that core of socially rented housing, and we've crucially said to the department, measure the benefits of this. You say yourselves, it's the cost benefit of this is one of the highest ratios. If you don't have the right social housing available, people end up being pushed into the private rented sector. They end up claiming more on housing benefit and all of the other challenges and costs that come from not having a stable home. So actually this is an investment that saves the taxpayer money.
Now, of course, I know the Public Accounts Committee explores many, many issues. You have different simultaneous inquiries going on at the same time. And one big issue this week that people have been talking about, of course, is the issue of PPE in relation to the Conservative peer, Michelle Mone. What are you looking into this issue, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, we've been looking at the government's procurement of PPE. In fact, it was almost exactly 2 years ago that we started doing this in earnest with support from our National Audit Office. But yesterday, Parliament agreed to pass us all of the papers in government relevant to the company MedPro, which is one of the companies and one of the 176 PPE suppliers that's in dispute with the Department for Health at the moment. So we will get access to those papers. We do this often as a committee, look at papers in private, and then we will decide what to do with them. In this case, though, these papers actually get given to us. They then belong to the committee. We are responsible, not reckless, so we will have to make a judgment collectively as a committee once we've seen them about what we do with them, what information, if any, we can put into the public domain.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that closely. But for now, Dame Meg Hillier, thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. Two really important subjects to discuss there. Well, moving on now. The public are being warned to be extra vigilant at World Cup events in crowded places through the festive period, as counter-terror police say that the threat from terrorism remains very real. Authorities say that the run-up to Christmas is always higher risk when it comes to security threats, although the police say there are no specific intelligence of a planned attack at this stage. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been speaking to one of England's most senior counter-terrorism officers.
Across the nation, many thousands are currently packing into venues to enjoy the delights of the world's premier football tournament. The last thing anyone here wants to be thinking about is the threat of attack. But terrorists often seek out crowded places to cause maximum harm. The festive period is traditionally higher risk. Add to that a massive programme of events like the World Cup, and authorities say everyone should be alert to the potential dangers.
We know that since 2017, the intelligence services and policing have foiled 37 attack plots in the UK. And I don't say that to alarm people, but I say that to show people how hard policing and the intelligence services are working in the background to keep them safe. Many terrorist investigations rely on information coming into the system, and I'm here to try and encourage the public to remain really vigilant and alert.
Here in Birmingham, the city's German market has fully reopened for the first time since the pandemic. Annual events like these are a key part of security planning. Ever since Islamist terrorists targeted Christmas markets in multiple European cities in recent years. All around this Christmas market are the discreet and not so discreet signs of security. The most obvious are these vehicle barriers. They're positioned at all the entrances to the market. In fact, these barriers are so commonplace now in centres of population right across the country. They're almost part of the street scenery.
It's nice to see people out. It's nice to get out and be able to do this again.
After lockdown, Andrew Lawson is just glad to see a bit of normality. And security concerns are not, he says, going to stop his enjoyment.
We all have to live our lives, don't we? You can't stay at home and wait for something to happen, you just have to live it.
Andy and Kelly had their first date here 3 years ago. Back for the first time since then. They say the obvious security presence doesn't concern them. Quite the opposite.
And we've seen all the security barriers up for years now. It's not an unusual thing to see, and I don't know of anything that's happened up here.
I think if you come anywhere where there's going to be a mass amount of people, you need to plan for anything really, and so having security, you feel a bit safer coming.
Authorities say they don't want to alarm the public. Indeed, terror groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been severely degraded by Western military activity in recent years. But the security services warn they are attempting to regroup, and they've never lost their capacity to radicalise and influence others over the internet. So while the public enjoy the World Cup and Christmas festivities ahead, they're also being asked to remain vigilant. Mark White, GB News, Birmingham.
Really serious stuff over the Christmas period. But finally today, the Conservative peer Baroness Michelle Mone will take a leave of absence from the House of Lords with immediate effect. She's at the centre of this controversy over links, or alleged links, to the firm PPE Medro, who were awarded £200 million of PPE contracts. This comes after the government stated that they will not oppose a motion from Labour to force ministers to publish documents related to these contracts. Well, I'm delighted that the former Labour MP Stephen Pound can join me now to talk through this issue. And Stephen, first of all here, when we're looking at PPE, can't we all acknowledge that it was an enormous struggle, a worldwide problem, and trying to get any PPE at all for the NHS was people were looking wherever they could find it?
No, that's just that doesn't wash. The idea that it was a crisis time and everybody was sort of flailing around. If you look at Kate Bingham's work when she did the rollout of the vaccine, that was a similar crisis, similar horrors, similar problems of supply chain, but she did it brilliantly, and it's one of the things we can be extremely proud of. The difference with the PPE contracts, it was me and my mate down the pub, and don't forget, it seems when Lord Dayton, who was actually the procurement czar, appointed a whole load of people to actually run these contracts. We don't know who they are. The government has refused freedom of information requests to even find out who on earth these cronies are. So I think what's interesting about the present time is that Matt Hancock is trying to get his retaliation in first on this one, because he was the man on the bridge at the particular time, and he is the person ultimately with whom the buck stops. There's an inquiry starting, as you well know, and that inquiry will almost certainly cast a light into some of the murky shadows and the dusky recesses here. But Hancock is actually getting his retaliation in now. The book that he's written with Isabel Oakeshott, who is an extremely professional, very good journalist, implies that he was working his nuts off 23 hours a day, flogging himself to death. I think he's trying to get his retaliation in, but in all honesty, John, the excuse that it was a tricky time and that we had to flail around simply doesn't wash. Kate Bingham and the vaccine rollout has shown the nonsense of that argument.
Let me read you a little bit of a letter sent by Rachel Reeves to Michael Gove, her then opposite number, in April 2020. It was very nice mug, by the way, Stephen. It was recommending various firms to provide PPE and the like to the NHS. It included a football agent company run by a professional football agent saying that they could provide ventilators, a historical clothing company offering to make gowns, a company that exists to reduce dependence on plastic, saying that they could provide tests, a private legal practice in Birmingham with only 2 employees and no website, saying they could provide scrubs and gowns. This was a very odd sort of eclectic list cobbled together by the Labour Party and sent across to the Conservative Party. How is that any different?
Let's get something absolutely straight. That was not a list of suggestions by Rachel Reeves. That was not her doing, as what we now know, Michelle Mondy, sort of ringing Lord Bethel and Lord Dayton up and saying, look after this person. This was a list of names of people who had contacted Rachel Reeves and said, may we be considered for this? Now, why they didn't contact Lord Bethel or Lord Dayton or the freewheeling Boris Johnson is entirely their business. But the fact is, she did what I would have done as an MP. If somebody had contacted me, I would have said, I'm not in a position to award contracts. They wouldn't let me near any contract awarding process, but I will forward it to the appropriate authorities, which is what Rachel did. She wasn't endorsing ventilators provided by football people. I don't think we can actually blame Rachel for this. I think she was being responsible and serious, but she did make the point that there was no personal endorsement with this, as you quite rightly say, very eclectic list.
Yes, it is interesting, though. I suppose when it comes to people going directly to members of Parliament, as we saw, whether it was Rachel Reeves or indeed whether it was Matt Hancock or anyone else, this is sort of what was happening at that time. Now, Dominic Cummings has been criticised that there weren't all of the normal procurement processes. There have been, of course, some legal cases about this, but Dominic Cummings has said in response to that it wasn't a normal time, that if there were all of these sort of bureaucratic processes gone through in the normal way, there'd have been no PPE achieved at all.
So, look, this was very typical of the freewheeling Boris Johnson. The idea that he'd come in and say, come on, chaps, let's get this sorted out. Let's not mess around with the bureaucrats. Let's not do due diligence. Let's not worry about, the background of these people. Come on, let's just get the stuff out there. It was freewheeling. There was no due diligence. And it was, frankly, unworthy of a serious British government. But the point I'll make, and I've made it before, is that if you actually look at the vaccine rollout, which was done professionally, with due diligence, seriously, with scientific advice, and properly researched, and was an astounding success. And fair play, credit to those Conservative ministers who were responsible at the time. But look at that, compare that with PPE, and I'm sorry, if you're going to actually say that one is chaos and that overrules due diligence, then what about the other? Kate Bingham was a success. Michelle Mone, well, she's a success as far as her own bank manager is concerned, and the rather opaque and distant trail of bank accounts dotted around the world, which involved her own bank actually reporting it to the government because of suspicions of money laundering.
Well, Stephen Pound, thank you so much for your thoughts today. That's it for the programme, I'm afraid. Coming up, it's Bev Turner today, but first, here's the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. It's cold out there this morning and there is some snow about, but for most actually it's about the frosty conditions but the bright blue skies. The air now coming from the north, it's particularly cold, it's all the way from the Arctic and it's feeling colder out there compared with recent mornings, that's for sure, but actually the cold weather has helped to clear the clouds as well. So plenty of sunshine through the Midlands into southwest and northwest England, southern Scotland, North Wales, despite the chill in the air. Temperatures slowly getting back above freezing later in the morning. There are areas of cloud around, most notably in the east and the north, and there are some showers. Northern Ireland, eastern England as well, but the main focus for showers is northern Scotland, where those showers are consisting of snow, and that snow will continue to build up through the rest of the day, 2 to 5 centimetres at lower levels. More than that over the hills could cause impacts for northern Scotland. Temperatures this afternoon in the mid-single figures at their highest, and then they quickly fall away overnight with widespread clear skies across most of the UK and temperatures dipping -1, -2 Celsius in towns and cities, but -3 to -6 or -7 in some shelter spots, even lower where we've got some snow cover in northern Scotland. Then as we start off Thursday, yes, there'll be a widespread frost. Temperatures will be sub-zero for most, but there'll be plenty of sunshine first thing. Watch out for ice around the fringes of the UK, where we've had showers coming and going through the night. And watch out for this feature that could bring some more prolonged snow into northwest England and North Wales by the afternoon. Could be some settling snow in places, particularly over hills. But all in all, it stays cold through the next few days. Into the weekend, we keep those clear, frosty nights. We keep the crisp winter sunshine by day, but temperatures by day only the low single figures.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go.